Alright, no intro. Get on with it, I suppose. Technical can edit that bit as an intro with some fancy music over it. So I guess welcome back, everyone. It's been a while. We've all been busy, as has Israel and has Palestine. Um, Unfortunately, we do have a personal life each, and actually, at the end of the day, it's quite difficult to coordinate when we can come on and podcast. But, we're here, and we've got 11 days of war and conflict to get through, as well as some other stuff on the side. So, yeah, what an 11 days, chaps.
Yeah, I know. I didn't honestly. I did not expect it to last 11 days. I mean, I thought like when it happened to me personally, I just thought it's just going to be one of these sort of usual bit of flare ups, dies down after like 48 hours. But no, that was definitely not the case.
No, definitely wasn't, was it? I mean, cliche. What usually happens is that a few barrages of rockets, few airstrikes, and then ceasefire for a couple of months, then same cycle. But after 24 hours, and I think everyone just sort of was like, well, I feel like that ain't gonna happen this
And I mean,
time.
I think we were sort of expecting some rocket fire to come. I mean, given the situation, what happened in Jerusalem at the mosque, there was always the expectation there was something was going to happen as a result of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even the Israelis knew that. They were looking at that and be like, right, they were making preparations for that when when the riots were happening. There was no way that Hamas and all the PIJ was going to let them away with that one.
Absolutely not. I mean, with just the rocket barrages were just so intense at times. I mean, the videos coming out, we've all seen them. I mean, there's been nothing. It was incredible to see.
Hmm.
Yeah, really, really was. And specs to Iron Dome. Right, as you say, everyone's footage by now, and it's quite something. Lighting up the night sky with interceptions. Yeah, what a piece of kit,
And obviously,
say without a doubt.
when they started targeting Tel Aviv, that was obviously the big escalation of you knew fine well once you start targeting Tel Aviv, obviously you're using your longer range
Yeah,
rockets. There's going to be more intensive action from the IDF.
yeah. What I love about that area is how there's like mutual boundaries in which if one area like one side crosses an area of boundary, then it's like you've escalated. It's quite a strange one to cover,
As
really, because
it's like an escalation ladder. You've climbed one rung of the ladder,
yeah,
so
yeah,
we're
yeah,
climbing the
exactly.
next rung.
Yeah, it's honestly it's quite. There's almost an element of humor about it because it's you do one thing and you have to go up a single energy level to be able to escalate, and there's that mutual boundary between the two sides. So obviously both acknowledge that those boundaries have been exceeded, and here we are.
And obviously as well, we had the rogue rocket fire on two occasions from Lebanon, I think.
Yeah, it was Hamas. So obviously not many. It's quite confusing actually. I was quite taken back because I Hamas have a number of separate factions in southern Lebanon, um, which have the capability to launch Katyusha rockets, etc., etc. And there was a bit, there was a time where I think everyone held their breath at the fact that Israel could be getting it from both sides and
Yeah, I
Hezbollah
think the
could get
I
involved.
think I think the concern was when the initial rocket fire reported from Lebanon, everyone thought has Hezbollah decided to get involved.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
mean, let's face it, the new of it, and they knew it was going on, but given the fact that it was kind of like rogue rocket fire, as in not essentially connected to them, they just kind of did nothing to say, well, wasn't us kind of attitude.
yeah, exactly. And I think should Hezbollah have been involved like on a major scale, I think we'd be having a very different conversation about the outcome. I think it's safe to say Hezbollah has more of a reach and capability than Hamas does.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah, and I think should they have got involved, I don't think we would be looking at the same success the Israelis have achieved. Which actually, that's quite subjective. I say success. There's a debate.
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
that
I mean,
they've had success in that they've been able to take out a significant amount of Hamas's infrastructure in the last 11 days. Infrastructure that they wouldn't really have had a legitimate excuse to target had the circumstances not arisen in the first place. But
it's
both sides are kind of in the position, well, yes, okay, they've achieved successes in one way or another, but the opposite side still exists, and so they
exactly.
haven't really gotten rid of the overarching problem
You're
that they
never
have.
you're never going to end the rocket threat from Hamas. They're going to, given the fact that they can domestically manufacture them, that's straight away. That's like how you even going to stop that? And second of all, obviously close ties to the Iranians, they can get equipment in. I mean, you'll never end the threat of them firing it, but you can certainly reduce the impact of them, which is what Israel's done through reducing their infrastructure.
it's a risk mitigation is what they've done over the last week and few days. Is that, as you say, Hamas is a very slippery target.
Mhm.
Civilian vehicles, civilian buildings, as we know, it's really chasing shadows at times, and Israel has done its utmost to disrupt that through human intelligence sources, open source intelligence source, iStar platforms, all that good stuff. They've done, as I personally, no one can truthfully say apart from the Israelis that how much the Hamas capability has been reduced.
Yeah,
I would I would suggest it's significant. I really would. I don't think a single organization can take 11 days of bombardment on this scale and walk away completely, sky high on morale and equipment on a personnel basis.
and there's quite a stark image that I believe Aurora Intel tweeted earlier today, just showing the locations of a lot of the confirmed Israeli airstrikes inside of Gaza and the various targets that they've hit. And it's like we've already said, it's not a small thing. This was no small scale operation. They really took the opportunity to try and hit Hamas as hard as they could. Um,
Yeah,
which,
and to say, Aurora Intel, massive shout out to them for their work over the last few days. It's where pretty much everyone has got their information from, and unbiased, and it's accurate. I think it's what everyone wants. We love to see it. So yeah, massive thank you to those guys. It's been a pleasure to follow it.
yeah,
It's like we saw.
To them.
I say as well, we saw Israel when they were striking like just roads in Gaza. You could see obviously hitting the Hamas tunnel network because you could see how hollow the roads was with the
mm,
way the road had completely collapsed in on itself. Like that is evidently not built on solid ground.
Yeah. I mean, some of those photos, it's blatantly obvious there's underground infrastructure there, blatantly obvious. I think it's quite something that a munition could do that. It's going to sound crude to a lot of people, but I marvel at the technology that it was used, that we saw being, fact that we could level a what was it, 16-story flats with three munitions.
mm.
That to me is incredible.
And it's obviously a
Definitely.
And
combination of the Israeli munitions and the fact that the buildings themselves have not been built as structurally well as they should be,
yeah,
perhaps,
yeah, of
and
course.
and that does come down partly to the way they're being used by Hamas. I mean, if you're going to stick a rocket launcher on the roof of a skyscraper or even in a flat pointing towards Israel, it's going to have an effect every time you launch a rocket out that window. It's going to impact on the structural stability. Um,
Yeah, it really is. And there's a post I saw. I can't really remember who posted it, but it was a depiction of the Gaza skyline before and after, and it dramatically reduced in terms of just the general buildings in your eyesight. As you look around, it's barren,
hmm.
quite something, really, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
and I can't remember exactly how many multi-story buildings were brought down. Maybe three, four, five. Jordan, I mean, you might be able to correct me on that one.
Yeah, I think 4 or 5 was definitely the figure.
Yeah. I mean, one of them. Well, this is where we get onto the controversial bit, isn't it? I think one of them housed international media.
It was Al Jazeera and AFP, the Associated Foreign Press, I think.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, that was it. Yeah, I remember. So it was and BBC World Service, I believe,
I mean,
were
the question, I mean, it obviously is controversial hitting that, but you've got a question at the same time of did the people in the building? Surely you would have noticed certainly something suspicious with Hamas operating in using that building.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
that's your permanent place of work, surely over the years you've worked there, something's caught your attention.
yeah, and the outrage targeting media, yeah. Of course, it needs to be investigated. Of course, evidence needs to be presented. But there is a real question: did the BBC, Al Jazeera, Russia Today willingly operate and knowingly operate out of a building used by an internationally designated terrorist organization?
Also,
That is a
you've also
serious question.
I think you've also got to look as well as given the situation, was there a building large enough to house them that Hamas didn't operate in at the same time?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and that's
And
something you got to remember because Hamas's sort of authority and power in Gaza is not to be underestimated. It used to be a case of whenever you referred to the government in Gaza, it was always a reference to sort of the Palestinian Authority, but to a certain extent in recent years, they have very much disappeared, and Hamas is kind of regarded as the de facto power in Gaza now, isn't it?
yeah,
Pretty much so. I mean, they'll
yeah,
do
go
it
on,
on
mate.
part. They'll kind of just that if you think it's become the image of Gaza, it's become the image of Hamas.
Hmm.
As unfortunate as that is for the people who have to live there and have to live under basically Hamas.
Yeah, and let's not pretend that's a positive. This is, as you just said, the image of Hamas. This is where this brings us on to the whole optics of what we've just seen. Um, let's just touch on how Israel is now regarded.
Hmm.
I think this is very important we touch on this because the amount of anti-Israeli sentiment has risen dramatically over the last few days. I mean, to levels in which, as Technical mentioned earlier, I mean, he's not here, but as he mentioned earlier, it was, nothing, I would say it's on the levels we saw back in 2000. Anti-Israeli sentiment not been this high for years.
Oh,
And I
absolutely. I
think,
mean, you could just
yeah,
look at some of the footage just from our own capital in London.
Yeah.
yeah, disgraceful in London. I think um, pro-Palestine rallies fine. You've got your right to free speech and all that, but actually, the moment it turns into just pure anti-Semitism, it needs to stop.
Yeah.
And there is something seriously institutionally wrong with how that was allowed to go ahead.
I think it's being massively motivated by if you spend well, certainly in the from a UK perspective, if you spend what 5-10 minutes looking through any social media of people in like their late teens, 20s, and their early 30s, it's filled with people posting stuff on their stories are just that really misinterpret the whole situation and end up just fueling these sorts of movements.
Yeah,
Yeah, of
and and
course.
and, and it, on that topic, it doesn't help that a lot of people are incredibly misinformed or are talking genuinely about something they really don't understand. I mean, you've only got to look at those protests in London to see that because you've got so many of these pro-Palestinian protesters wandering around waving the Palestinian flag upside down. And you think, well, hang on a second, if you can't even get the flag the right way up, how on earth are you supposed to understand this problem that's been going on for almost 100 years now?
I mean, it's pretty much been going on since well, you could argue say it's been going on since 1948. I mean, you ain't gonna solve it through your Instagram post if it cannot be solved by this time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you just said, mate, as you just said about the being held upside down, I really do think and we're going to get I'm going to get slaughtered for saying this, but I think what we have seen in terms of resistance to Israel, I think, of course, we need to criticize. We need to deeply delve into what's right and what's wrong, what's justified, what's not.
Mm.
There needs to be an investigation into, all the, well, not all of the airstrikes, but airstrikes that endangered or harmed civilians. That's accountability. I agree with
Yeah,
that. However,
100%.
what we have seen is how an a pro-Palestinian rhetoric to some extent and in some numbers borders very, very closely to anti-Semitism,
Mm.
and that's completely unacceptable.
And I think the issue as well that we're going to see is, yes, okay, Israel will probably be happy for an independent body to investigate the airstrikes and so on, but you will never see the same level of scrutiny of Hamas's behaviour just
No,
because
of course,
of
yeah,
who they are, because they are a terrorist organisation at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, all the Israeli airstrikes have done is sort of turned back the clock a little bit for them. Hamas will be back. It will be back in the fight probably a lot sooner than we imagine. Iran is already flying supplies into Syria to be passed through to Hamas again to reinforce them. I've personally seen tweets today from the IRGC's commander, General Khani, and obviously the Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei, both of whom are, singing the praises of Hamas's actions in the last 12 days, um, and sort of re-emphasising their support for the actions that have been taken against Israel, the rocket strikes and the anti-tank missiles and the IEDs and the stabbing attacks and all sorts that have been going on. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, completely.
the IDF, we have to be very, very clear. The Israeli Defense Forces have been incredibly careful when it comes to their airstrikes and who they're hitting and what they're hitting. Probably more so, I would argue, than the US Air Force or the RAF or a lot of other, sort of world-leading air forces are in combat situations. They go out of their way in so many different, you know, different ways to make sure that the target they are hitting is a military target, that there is the lowest chance of civilian casualties, all the way down to literally, as we've seen in videos in the last 12 days, ringing up the owners of some of these buildings and saying to them, look, you need to get your people out of this building now. Just get everyone out. We will wait. And,
Yes,
that's not something you would ordinarily see. Does it mean that Hamas operatives get the opportunity to leave the building as well? Yes, it does. But at the end of the day, the IDF obviously views each of these buildings as significant enough of a piece of Hamas infrastructure that they're prepared to flatten the building with or without Hamas operatives inside. And unfortunately, we have
yeah, and
seen some pretty shocking videos of the telephone conversations and pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas building owners turning around and saying things like, well, bomb us then. We don't care. You'll kill
If
our
you look at
children and
if you
you'll
look
look evil for it.
if you look at the buildings in Gaza, a lot of the high rises have parking garages and basements, and those are the things Hamas use. And I mean that you cannot target the basement or the parking garage without targeting the building itself.
Yeah.
yeah, and that video was horrifying. I think, and that goes to show the extent in which Hamas will go to win the propaganda war. In which,
Mm.
personally, this is my own opinion, I think Hamas has come out of this very, very well in terms of their image and the propaganda war. Um,
Yeah.
Israel may have won the war of attrition and the war of on the ground and in the air. However, I think it's quite clear that Hamas has won the war on social media,
Yeah.
which would that's quite significant.
And again, it comes down to the way in which the information is being shared. The IDF has been very good at providing footage. It's been very good at providing explanations and graphics and all sorts to explain what it is that it's doing with the airstrikes and what exactly Israel has been facing with the rocket attacks. But at the end of the
You,
day, the backing for Hamas and for the Palestinian, you know, story is still significant around the world, and it always has been, probably always will be, and like we mentioned earlier, particularly in the UK, it's been a lot of sort of university age people sharing sort of effectively what is pro Hamas propaganda. They're not aware that that's what they're sharing because they're literally just seeing it being shared by one of their political groups or an
like
influential account, and they jump on the bandwagon for that moment in
It's
time.
like we saw images during the time of people of obviously there was various images of children crying and sitting in rubble, and
Mm.
several times those pictures had turned out they were actually from Syria and were a result of what Assad had done to his own people, but they were simply taken and used as a piece of propaganda to say, "Oh, look what Israel's done."
Yeah, and it's we've covered this in previous episodes as well. It's so important with footage like that to verify the sources. Um, Although open source intelligence is a blessing in so many ways because it allows us to see what's going on, far beyond what we're being told by governments and by mainstream media. But at the same time, it's a two-edged sword because you've got to be so careful to check where the footage is coming from, when it was filmed, and so on. And we've seen throughout this recent Israel Palestine situation, and even just outside of that in the days before and since, we've seen so many instances of images being taken out of context and footage being shared as new when in fact some of it is very very old footage from a completely different situation.
Yeah, I
Like one
mean,
thing
I
I'd
looked
always
at.
say is
Go on, mate.
it's like for like like photos like what seen from Israel and Gaza. It honestly will only take 30 seconds of your time just to pop that photo into a reverse search and just have a look and see if it comes produces any earlier results. It's honestly, for
Mm.
30 seconds, it is totally worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, the amount of seething I have done at photos and videos supposedly from Gaza. I believe there was one I saw, trying to recall, of a. That's right, that's right. I remember that. So there was a. If anyone remembers, there was a chemical plant in China that went up a few years ago, and it was,
Mm.
of course, it was one of the world's biggest explosions in terms of magnitude. And someone had, put a little hashtags like hashtag Gaza under attack, etc., on that particular video, and it had thousands of likes,
Yeah.
and it clearly was nowhere near Gaza.
Mm.
Um, it's infuriating, absolutely infuriating. Some of it.
Yeah.
Um, go on.
And this is just very much the whole issue with the whole propaganda war. Um, it's something we've seen an awful lot in recent times. It's been very. I think it's probably been most clear with Israel and Gaza, and the ongoing fighting in the last sort of 10, 15 years in particular. I don't think we've really seen it as vividly in, say, the situation in Syria and Iraq, or Myanmar or Venezuela. It's very much been something that has really taken hold in the Middle East, in Israel and Gaza in particular, and with Iran and everything else that's going on there at that moment in time.
I
Um,
would say I
Go on.
would say as well, like the outcome of the Israel Gaza situation, it has been a major diplomatic victory for the Egyptians.
Yes, yeah,
That
and we have
obviously
Yeah, definitely.
we can't go any further without really sort of taking our hats off to the Egyptians because this is not the first time they've done this.
no,
They have
they're
really
pretty
done an
much always.
astonishing job in recent years of diplomacy for, all sorts of situations. You've had, obviously, we had the major upheaval in Lebanon last year following the Beirut port explosion. The Egyptians were involved in helping to sort of calm the waters a little bit and ensure a transition of government there. We've had, obviously, as we've mentioned, the Israel-Gaza situation in the last week. Again, Egypt's involvement in diplomacy there has been astonishing. Egypt's becoming quite a player in the Middle East in that regard. They are being seen more and more, I think, as a diplomatic powerhouse, which I know the Israelis are definitely grateful to the Egyptians for that, and I suspect a great many of the other Arab countries are grateful to Egypt for the role it's playing now. Because it's worth remembering as well, Egypt was one of the warring factions when it comes to Israel not that many years ago. So
Yeah,
it's a really
go back to the
positive
day,
turnaround.
go back to the days of the Cold War. Egypt and Israel really didn't have good relations. I mean, their relations still aren't perfect, but Egypt had massively managed to sort of be like the calm voice in the room.
Yeah,
Yeah, massive hat tip to Egypt. I think it's been completely overlooked. The influence in which they've had and the success they've had in bringing about a peace to the region. I mean, look at Libya. To an extent, I will say to an extent, Libya, the Palestinians, Israelis, the Lebanese and the Israelis. Um, they really just have that touch of being able to, sit both sides down and talk it out,
yeah.
work out what's done. And I think that's they to be reckoned for that. It's
Yeah,
been thank
and that
God for
they've
Egypt.
kind of taken on that responsibility almost from America. I think it's fair to say that the US has had very little to do with this most recent Israel-Gaza, spat. Um, I think we've had President Biden has made the odd statement saying that Israel has the right to defend itself, but also calling at the same time for the end of hostilities. But we've seen very little else in that regard. Particularly diplomatically, there's obviously been no military involvement, although I have read somewhere today that the US is prepared to restock Israel's Iron Dome interceptors for all of the interceptors that were fired during this recent conflict. I don't entirely know how that works because I thought Iron Dome was a Israeli-built system anyway, but we'll see what the US
And
decides
it's
to do
what
there.
depends like the individual components of the missiles.
Right. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting to see, and I think, do you know what, there's something in which I like to touch on a personal perspective, and that's I'm quite taken back with how supportive the US has been of Israel. Um, you know, Biden administration, I've been, as you're aware, as the listeners are aware, I've been quite critical of the current administration's foreign policy. Um, and I think what we've seen is a shift. Um, I wasn't expecting, typically I was expecting, um, just, we need to bring both sides to the table, uh, yada, 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 negotiations. But, the tweets, congressmen, congresswomen, you know, both houses have been, you know, from what I've seen, supportive of Israel, the Israel's right to self-defense. Obviously, there's a large number which aren't. I won't name them, but I think those who follow me on Twitter will know who I mean.
Mm.
Um, but it's been interesting. I personally have noticed, and this might just be me to it too much, but I've I've noticed that they've been a lot more one-sided than I believe they would be.
I think, to be honest, what we've seen is we've like you say, we've seen the senators and the senior congressmen and stuff very much being more supportive verbally, but we've kind of seen, if anything, to compensate for that, we've seen the president and secretaries of state not being quite as vocal as we've seen in recent years. I think under the Trump administration, we got very used to seeing him being very vocally supportive of Israel, while the House was not quite so vocal. I think with Biden and with the last 2 weeks, we've kind of seen the presidential elements sort of pull back slightly in how vocal it is, while the like I say, the Senate has sort of stepped up and spoken out a bit more about what's going on. But I think
Yeah,
for me,
that
it's still been very quiet. Um, we've not had the kind of statements we would normally see. Um, Things at the UN have been fairly subdued. I think what we have to bear in mind is that the US is still balancing the fact that it is having these nuclear agreement talks with Iran, and Iran being the primary supporter of Hamas and supplier and all the rest of it. It's kind of been a bit of a balancing act for the US, where they want Iran on side in order to get this deal pushed through, but at the same time they have to be careful not to sort of set a precedent where they don't condemn Hamas rocket attacks, but at the same time they don't want to anger the Iranians by turning around and actively helping Israel during the fight.
yes, yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting going forward to see how the US decides to proceed with restocking hardware, etc., and policy towards Israel. Um, but yeah, as you say, from last Trump, lead by example, very very vocal on foreign policy, international issues, to complete reverse, where more or less backbenchers are the most vocal, and the leadership has been relatively silent. Um, and many will argue that that's a better thing. I'm trying to think of how to word this. I would say I would prefer to see Biden being more vocal on
Mm.
topics. People want to know how the world works around them, what is happening in the world. I don't think that having someone on the back benches speaking on behalf of the West is going to help the situation. But yeah, it's a very very interesting situation, really.
Yeah,
And
as you said, it comes down to Biden's foreign policy, and it's something we've spoken of. He's not very clear on what his intentions are. He's clear about Russia. He seems to be very firmly against Russia, although having said that, we've seen him take a step back again this week and drop sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Europe and Russia. After months of saying that Russia should not be allowed, he seems to have just sort of said, no, you know what, we'll let them do what they want. Um, as we said before, he seems to be very much happy to let Iran get what it wants, as long as he can sort of put a rubber stamp on a piece of paper and say, yeah, we've got a nuclear deal with them.
yeah, I mean, as we've seen as well, I mean, yesterday, wrong, but yesterday, I mean, the Houthis are back on the list.
Hmm,
I tweeted yesterday, I tweeted y'all last night that quite evident that they were removed off the foreign terrorist organization list solely for political posturing and political reasoning.
yeah,
Um, Made no logical sense to prove a point. Um, that ultimately has cost lives, and it's driven the Yemeni conflict deeper into destruction, as we've discussed before, that the fact that they were removed meant that considered themselves more or less off the hook. They can get away with more.
yeah.
And I think the fact that they're all back on it is a step forward, but it's a cat. Islamic mistake that they were taken off in the first place.
Yeah, and it's hurt U.S. relations with Saudi ultimately. We're
Yeah,
still seeing, the defense deals that were signed towards the end of the Trump administration. They seemingly have not gone any further at this point. So even though the Houthis are back on the list of terrorist organisations, I can't really imagine the Saudis are particularly happy with the US at the minute. Um, it
no,
interestingly as
they
well,
definitely won't
with
be.
just while we're still on the topic of Israel and Gaza, the Saudis have been surprisingly quiet on this occasion. In previous
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
rounds of fighting, we've seen the Saudis almost helping the Egyptians with the diplomatic side of things. We've often seen Israeli diplomats going to Saudi, having private chats with Saudi leadership about potential peace efforts and potential peace agreements. And there's been none of that on this occasion, as so far as we're aware, which probably goes into why this fighting has gone on for nearly 2 weeks before the Egyptians have managed to sort of sort a ceasefire of sorts out.
so, yeah. As of now, it is the what 21st. Yeah, so recording taking place on the 21st of May, and we have a ceasefire that is holding. So
Yeah, how
yeah,
long it holds for remains to be seen. Let's be honest, it will probably only hold so long as Hamas needs to rearm. Like I say, that there's been a lot of jubilation amongst the pro-Palestinian groups, both in Gaza itself and overseas, and they very much are claiming it as a victory at the moment.
yes, and that's the most important bit, isn't it? It's trying to salvage some of that.
Mm,
Um, it's claims of victory when all it really cease ceasefire or not, they'll claim victory nevertheless. Um,
But I honestly see the situation as is if Hamas can claim this as a victory, and obviously, despite the obvious losses to equipment and the various buildings destroyed, if they see this as a victory, I can't see much motivation for them holding this ceasefire for an extensive amount of time.
no,
yeah, no, I can't see it.
they want to capitalise on that feeling as quickly as they can, and I suspect, like I say, that's why we're seeing Iran starting to move assets in by air into Syria in preparation to then ferry it across the border through Lebanon down into Gaza. Um, we're not likely to see an end to Israeli airstrikes. While they might not happen in Gaza itself, we can almost guarantee that we're going to see stuff happening around Damascus airport as those supply shipments start coming in. It's going to be a return to normality in some regards for a little while at least. But
Yeah, it's gonna
yeah,
back to the status quo, isn't it now? Aircraft comes in, deposits weapon shipments. Breaking news: air defense active above Damascus. You know the rest.
yeah,
And I think that's going to be it now. Hamas has been reduced significantly,
mm,
and I think Israel will now want to just start cutting the legs out of it before it can grow.
yeah. It's
It's
worth
gonna
it's
it's gonna
worth
really
bearing in
cut it
mind.
off at its source.
It's worth bearing in mind that prior to the start of this recent fight, the open sources intelligence community believes that Hamas had somewhere in the region of about 5,500 rockets, a combination of Iranian supplied weapons and sort of home built devices. And obviously, what we've seen over the last 12 days of fighting was some 4,500 of those rockets being fired at Israel. So we are probably going to see a lull for now while Hamas rebuilds that arsenal. And it will take them time because you cannot just sort of manufacture thousands of rockets as quickly as they've been fired. I think ultimately, had the fighting continued into this coming week, it probably wouldn't have lasted much longer because Hamas was rapidly running out of rockets.
Yeah, I think
Launches
Hamas
were
would have
being
pushed for a
hit.
ceasefire.
Yeah, Hamas ultimately probably would have had to go for a ceasefire, and I think the Egyptians timing this, this ceasefire when they have, has allowed both sides to sort of claim victory, and ignore the fact that yes, Hamas was running out of rockets and probably would have had to declare defeat sooner or later. But on the other hand, Israel, like we said, was definitely losing the propaganda war, and so might have had to call an end to hostilities itself before too long as well.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's going to be very interesting. I wouldn't put it past Israel to, I do believe next couple of days we'll see a hit on Damascus or Homs, um, just to mitigate the threat of restocking of weapons. I think Israel needs to start pushing that more, start really cutting off the supply if it wants to secure if it wants to secure the threat from Palestine, from West Bank, it needs to start preventing the flow of weapons at the source.
Hmm.
And how far to the source they go is up to them. I really do believe we'll see just a small, maybe even a moderate uptake in strikes on Syria, but apart from that, nothing too drastic. They proved that they can take them militarily, so what
Yeah,
else is there to prove, really?
and I think as well we need to keep a very close eye on how these Iran-US nuclear talks go. Israel's been very vocally against any sort of Iranian nuclear deal, and understandably so. The US is ploughing on regardless, though, and we have seen in the last few months we've seen what we can only assume is Mossad agents going into Iran and sabotaging various facilities, and that's not going to end. That is going to carry on, and I suspect we're going to see a great deal more of that, um, depending on how this Iran-US nuclear agreement goes.
And how much pressure the US is going to exert on Israel to essentially stop it,
Mm,
from their point of view, that's just going to compromise everything and make things far more difficult from the US perspective.
yeah,
And they put pressure. There were a number of phone calls between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Biden about giving situational updates to the US on the conflict. There were reports, one confirmed that the Biden administration issued a statement saying should hostilities not cease within a few days, uh, the US would start to put pressure on the Israelis to stop. I think that was turning because that gave the Israelis a time frame in which they could get operations done by.
yeah,
That shows that rightfully the US is willing to draw that line in the sand, um, prevent further loss of life. So yeah, hopefully this is a sign of things to come. 3-4 years of Biden still. Hopefully this is the foreign policy turnaround we've been waiting for. So yeah,
I think it's probably worth us moving on now to just briefly mention Carrier Strike Group. We do keep mentioning
way.
it, and we can't seem to avoid mentioning it. And I'm sure if Technical was with us this evening, he would be
Now he'd have logged
crying
off
into
by
his
now, to be
hands by
honest.
now.
Yeah, he'd be bracing
Obviously,
for
we've just
seizure.
had Exercise Strike Warrior off the coast of Scotland. HMS Queen Elizabeth's returned to port for a few hours, and tomorrow the entire strike group will leave harbour again.
Harbor in the evenings. Some of them leave in the afternoon, but HMS Queen Elizabeth herself leaves about 9 or 9:30 at night.
Yeah, I think if
Yeah, 9:30 tomorrow night. Yeah.
um, obviously that is a major thing, and that will be a topic that we will be. We'll try not to focus too much on it in the coming months, but it will be getting the mentions as
We'll certainly
the
follow
strike
it.
group moves around. Yeah, we'll be
Certainly
following
follow
the
its
progress
progress
around the
around the world.
world and sort of updating you guys on any interesting news with regards to that.
I mean, where does she go at Portsmouth now? She goes was it called Atlantic Warriors?
Atlantic Trident with the French
That's
that's
it.
ongoing at the moment in France. Then it's part of Steadfast Defender with off the coast of Portugal area. Then it's meeting up with the Charles de Gaulle in the Mediterranean. Then it's maybe something in the Eastern Mediterranean, don't really know. Then it's through the Suez Canal in into
I
the Indian
cannot wait.
Ocean.
Do you know what? My highlight at like the first stage is going to be the meet up with the French carrier strike group. The piss take is going to be immense.
Yeah, I mean we've already
Like,
seen today, haven't we,
oh god,
from
yeah.
Britain is
our
gonna.
lovely hosts at the UK Defence Journal have managed to cause quite a stir today with a photo of, well, an edited photo of the Charles de Gaulle parked between our two carriers, and that's caused all sorts of anguish online. Various French commentators getting very, very angry about
Well,
things.
I would say a lot of the French defence community, certainly on Twitter, have taken the joke quite well and kind of joined in and had a joke back.
Yeah,
Which
Yeah, I mean, and then others haven't.
to be honest, it's
Others
been
just
so
taken it.
it theoretically it at least looks like from my point of view that it's a lot of sort of like larger British accounts have failed to see the joke.
yeah, and we've seen again this evening a mainstream UK news agency has had to pick up the story and sort of emphasise that it's just a joke, and that the French carrier is not in fact half the size of the British carriers. Um, I mean, the irony is that give it 10, 15 years' time, and the French will be sort of turning this joke back on us because their future carrier design is going to be a bit larger than our ones are.
It's also absolutely disgusting. Have you seen the bridge? It's been. Oh my god. Was it? They claimed it was inspired by French medieval architecture.
Yeah.
It honestly
For
just
those who
looks like
haven't
the bridge
seen it
wearing a
yet, I
straw
will.
hat.
I'll get technical to stick an image of it on the YouTube video so that you can have a look at that. It is basically. I think the simplest way of describing it is the French have taken the Charles de Gaulle design. They have stretched it out to being almost the length of the US Gerald R. Ford class, and then taken an island design like the Ford class, but made it as French as they possibly can, without,
Yeah, it's
you know, lining the edge of it with baguettes and God knows what else.
I mean,
painting it white and all that stuff. Yeah.
I'm quite interested with with obviously the replacement for Charles de Gaulle that there was talk of it having a vertical landing spot so it can operate US Marine Corps F-35Bs, obviously British F-35Bs, Singapore's and Japan's F-35Bs.
Yeah,
Italians, etc.
it'll be an interesting concept. I somehow doubt that the French will
Sides,
be
yeah.
that keen to have F-35s on board. But having said that, it is worth mentioning the German, French, and I believe it's Spanish joint project at the moment for a future combat air system. There is rumours that that stealth jet will be vertical takeoff and landing capable.
Ooh,
But
that's
I
Whether or
interesting.
think
not
that
that
certainly
ends up being the case, we shall have to wait and see.
I think that certainly opens up as quite a big discussion of do they go for a naval variant as well of it?
Yeah, and obviously for some time now there has been talk between France and Germany of operating a joint carrier air wing.
I mean, you've got to also look at it from the Spanish point of view as well, if they need sort of replacements for their Harriers as well.
Yeah, the Spanish are really struggling at the minute with aircraft in general. I mean, they've had to cut their Typhoon order. They're trying to get their Hornets replaced at the minute. The Harriers are desperately old and in need of replacement. So this project is kind of a bit of, they need this to work. And whether the French and the Germans end up overcomplicating things by trying to make it a vertical takeoff and landing carrier capable, you know, stealth jet with all sorts of weaponry and lasers and stuff that the Spanish then can't afford, we're going to have to wait and see. But yeah, it's
Speaking of Harrods, is it me who was only just like, was it just me who was really really bummed that the United States Marine Corps didn't land one on HMS Queen Elizabeth during Exercise Strike Warrior?
Would have been lovely to see,
Everyone.
but I think it doesn't have the qualifications to begin I don't think it has carrier qualifications to land on it, either the pilots of themselves or the aircraft, and I'm not too sure about the heat coming down on the deck if the deck's specially built to
Yeah.
cope with the F-35B, or if they don't want to risk landing another aircraft that they haven't necessarily tested the deck for just before they go on a
Yeah,
9-month
that's
deployment.
And you have to remember the Harriers are coming to the end of their service with the US as well. I mean, I was thinking just the other day, it's been 10 years now since the Harriers left UK Royal Navy flight decks for the final time.
I mean, yeah,
It's been
a
an
Riga 10.
astonishingly long 10 years in some ways, and yet at the same time, it kind of surprised me that it had been 10 years already. So the Americans are very much sort of just using the Harriers until they have enough F-35Bs to sort of,
It's a stopgap,
give them a
really, isn't it?
fond
They're just sort of
farewell.
using it in a way in which they can just sort of make up the numbers.
Yeah,
Um, and they're using it to good effect. It is what it is, but it's gonna be sad to see it go.
mm,
Um, one less nation with Harriers. As we know, us Brits are very fond of them.
yeah,
So but they will be on to bigger and better things, literally.
indeed,
Um,
indeed.
so very excited. We're all very excited about CSG 21. Global Britain. Uh, Brexit doesn't mean that we're closed for business, and I think that's really the message of it politically.
Yeah,
Britain is open for business. Um, how many stupid amount of countries we're visiting, exercising with various navies, photo exercises, diplomatic visits. We can't wait. The next 9 months are going to be mega.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. It's going to be good to see. Uh,
yeah, it really is. Very very proud. Following the progress since the it's about 2015, 16. Just to see it get to this point is mad.
mm.
So yeah, I think if with
While
I
we're
guess that,
on that topic of the Royal Navy at the minute, it's we've obviously had the news this week. We've had the confirmation of ship names for the Type 31 frigates.
oh right, yeah, this is proper
I
controversial,
don't
isn't
like
it?
them.
This
I
is
don't
No, no,
like
no.
them.
I'm
this has been
sorry,
a
but
source of a lot of contention in the
yeah,
UK defence
oh,
community's Discord
I
server.
really cannot fathom. I'm sorry, but I cannot fathom inspiration class.
Yeah,
It's.
Oh,
I
I
think
mean,
they would have just
oh,
been better off just leaving it called the Type 31 frigate and then just gone with the
or no,
names
no,
they've gone
or they
with.
just or legacy.
just putting some repurposed names from an old class, because I mean,
Yeah,
to say inspiration class, the only one that actually seems to have sort of like inspiration vibes to it is HMS Ventura, as in going on a venture, but Formidable, Campbelltown, Bulldog, and Active. HMS Active. What inspiration's that?
Yeah,
yeah.
and
It's
it's a
just
case
pointless.
of this is the thing with the Royal Navy. It's always been a history of a board at the Admiralty who sit down and pick the ship names, and they do prefer they do prefer to pick historical names. So every single one of these ship names dates back to a vessel from the Second World War. In the case of HMS Active, she was a light aircraft carrier. Ventura was a submarine. Campbelltown was a destroyer. What were the other two? It was Formidable was
Oh
an aircraft
god.
carrier as well, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, I hate the formidable. I believe was it
Bulldog
Jordan?
was
Correct me
another
if
destroyer, wasn't it?
Yeah, Bulldog was which present during Jersey, the surrender of Axis forces. Yeah, it was Bulldog, wasn't it? It was Bulldog.
Yeah, yeah.
Bulldog was I believe, frigate. I'll probably get crucified for that if it's wrong. But it was a frigate. If it was the frigate present for the Axis surrender in the Channel Islands. So all of them have significance.
Yeah,
All of the
they
names
do
have,
have significance. They do have historical,
and don't get me
very
wrong, we
important
like the
stories,
name.
but
Most people like the names. It's the name of the class in which people,
yeah,
don't get. It's why weren't they named either active class or legacy class? Inspiration class.
yeah,
I'm going to
it
say the
it
W word.
doesn't
I'm going to
really
say the
fit.
W word here. It sounds a bit woke. It sounds a little bit woke.
Hmm.
In which people aren't going to like that. So I hope I hope main office comes to its senses and names it something in which reflects the cut. Reflects it better. I think.
Yeah, but it is good to finally have some names for the ships. There's been so much speculation, in the Discord server in the last 6 months about what the ships were going to be called. We had all sorts of suggestions being thrown around, and to be fair, I think we are, for the most part, quite pleased with some of the suggestions. Um, I've got no objection to Formidable and Venturer and Active, um, all ships that have, as we've said, very important stories of their involvement in World War Two. Um, it does, however, fill me with a little bit of concern as to whether or not the ship names for the Type 32s will continue the trend, whether we're going to get another class name that makes us all facepalm. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I
I
think
hope
for
that, I go on, mate, go on.
I was going to say I'd like for the Type 32s with them going with the plan for them to replace the Batch 2 EVs overseas. I'd like to see them utilize some names from the days of when they would patrol the Persian Gulf or the Beria Patrol. I would like to see them use some names from of those classes.
Hmm. I,
Yeah.
I, I half wonder if maybe naming them after the Centaur class aircraft carriers would be a good idea, because obviously the Centaur class aircraft carriers, for those who are not familiar, was kind of the last major fleet carrier design built before the Royal Navy withdrew from east of Suez during the infamous white paper in the 1960s.
Can't see them getting the Centaur class until the days Albion and Bulwark are retired.
Yeah, that is the thing. That being said, both Albion and Bulwark are due to leave service later this decade, round about the same time that the Type 32s are due to be arriving. So it's not impossible, but I mean, at the end of the day, it'd be nice to have another HMS Hermes. I think we're all, we can all agree to that.
Mhm.
What other ship names they go for, bearing in mind, of course, that the idea with the Type 32s is that they are going to be effectively motherships for unmanned warfare vehicles of various types. So the idea of naming them after former aircraft carriers is not necessarily a bad idea. Um, Again, that
Yeah, I agree.
I kind of would have liked in that regard to have seen HMS Formidable the name reserved for a Type 32 instead of being used for a
Yeah,
Type
no, I was just
31.
about to say I would personally like to see Formidable, as you say, reserved for 32. If they do choose to go down the Hermes, carrier route, which I hope they do.
Hmm.
I sincerely hope they do. So yeah, we'll see, but can't get any worse than inspiration at the end of the day.
And there goes the Admiralty saying, "Hold my beer."
Yeah, there we go. See, I've actually just touched wood. I've actually just gone and touched some wood because someone at Naval HQ will be listening to this and be like, "Hold this,
Yeah,
hold my officer's sword." So yeah,
yeah.
we'll see. Yeah. Once again, please, 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 no more inspiration class. So yeah. Um, on that note, John, do you want to news roundup, or is
I can do. Have you
yeah,
guys got
yeah, sure,
anything you
go
want
ahead.
to chuck in there?
To be honest, it's been mostly Israel Palestine CSG related for me. I mean, I've not really kept track of it.
Yeah, it's fair to say it's been a little difficult. Those of you who follow me on Twitter will have noticed that I have tweeted very little else until sort of yesterday evening. Over the last 2 weeks, it has been mostly Israel Gaza stuff. That's not intentional. It's just what information comes to me, unfortunately. And my feed has literally had very little else but Israel Palestine sort of stuff coming into it. Um, That being said, there are a few news stories that have caught my attention today, so I'm just going to try and quickly go through a few of them. If you will give me a moment, got to find my notes.
Insert elevator music here.
So we've had the UK has restarted the Fleet Solids support ship project for 3 vessels. Some of you will
3.
remember a while back.
Oh
Yeah, 3
God,
vessels. Yeah.
is
Some
that
of you
it?
will remember a while back the project was started and eventually was sort of terminated, and the promise was made that the project would be back once they managed to sort of sort out some issues with the procurement process. At the moment, the plan is for 3 40,000-ton vessels for a total cost of £1.6 billion to be in service by 2029. I believe they've opened now for companies to offer their suggestions. So that will be an interesting project to look at, because there's obviously been a great deal of domestic sort of politics around this, and the intention that these ships need to be built in the UK instead of,
Yeah, I was just about to say,
farmed out to other countries.
if this current government is going to stand by its promises, if they are built outside the UK, there will be questions.
Because they've pushed massively for shipbuilding has been naval shipbuilding has been a particular focus of the current government, and it would basically, well, it would be a goal in their own net, because it would just be undermining their own policy.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps have unveiled a new unmanned aerial vehicle, which they have named Gaza, in honor of the resistance groups that have been fighting Israel for the last 2 weeks. The UAV is capable of flying 2,000 kilometers and has 13 stations on the wings and the fuselage for different weapons. Iran's also unveiled a new surface-to-air missile system, which we have very little detail for at the moment, and a new radar called the Quds, which analysts believe is based on the Russian Vostok E radar system. So that's an interesting development, and we're not entirely sure if this is Russia supplying equipment to Iran now, or if this is equipment Iran has had hold of for some time and it's just developing the technology now. But obviously that whole relationship between Russia and Iran, particularly with the clash with US relations, is worth keeping an eye on as well for now. Italian company M23 has delivered 2 midget submarines to Qatar. Although we don't know an awful lot about the submarines, our friends over at Naval News and HI Sutton have estimated the submarines to be around about 30 metres in length, and at least one of them carries 2 torpedoes, 2 heavyweight torpedoes in shoulder-mounted torpedo launchers. You can find the full article regarding that story on the navalnews.com website. The Red Arrows for the Royal Air Force have formally been signed off following their training in Cyprus. So their display team for this year has now been formally confirmed in a post on Facebook yesterday. In
God,
terms of what air
that'd be
shows
good to see.
are going to be taking place around the world this year, it kind of remains to be seen at the moment. Obviously, with a lot of nations
All a bit
still
up in
dealing
the
with
air.
COVID,
Yeah.
it's likely to be a smaller display season than we've been used to seeing, but it is good to see them back on the flight line and ready to go.
Yeah, that'd be good. Hopefully, I get to opportunity to see them again this year. It's always a pleasure to watch the Red Arrows.
Mm.
Exceptional skills, exceptional flying. What else could you ask for?
Yeah.
So, on that note,
And sorry, just one
oh,
last
go on.
news
Yeah,
story.
after you.
We got reports a few days ago from the US that an F-15QA, which is a Qatari advanced version of the F-15E, Strike Eagle crashed during a test flight in the US. Although the pilot and weapon system operator ejected safely, one of the two crew members has sustained minor injuries. At the moment, we do not know the cause of the crash. An investigation is underway, but it's unusual. We've not seen an F-15 crash in a very long time, particularly one that has not long come off the
The
production
last
line.
one was one that came down off the coast
Yeah,
of the
North
UK.
Sea. I was going to say that was near you, Jordan. That was the
Yeah, but that
one
wasn't a
last
new
year.
build airframe, was it? That's the important thing to note here. This F-15 QA had reportedly only been produced in the last month, and was just undergoing one of the final test flights prior to being delivered to Qatar when it crashed. Like I say, we don't know any details as to why it crashed or how it crashed at the moment. But that will be one to watch, particularly with the US now entering full production of the F-15EX Eagle 2, as it's become known.
Very, very, very exceptional naming convention there. Who would have thought? Very, very inventive. Yes. Yeah. One last note from us. We've been getting a lot of questions about platforms. Posted this week. We can confirm we are looking at these options.
Yeah.
Um,
Some of you will, well, a significant number of you by now have seen the tweet I put up about this earlier this week. Somewhere in the region of 45,000 of you have now seen the tweet about it, and we've had a lot of positive feedback. We are at the moment in the process of getting onto other platforms. Because of technology and the way things are, I can't confirm yet what platforms that will be. Obviously, we will do everything we can to get onto all of the platforms we're currently looking at. But it may well be that if we have any technical issues, there may be a sort of phased introduction to other platforms. So it is coming. We have heard your requests. We do appreciate, obviously, that watching the stream on YouTube is not the easiest thing to do, particularly when the streams are an hour or more in length. And Tom is kicking himself now because he very nearly let the cat out of the bag there.
yeah, very,
But yeah,
very near.
it is a work in progress. Whether we manage to do it before the end of May or whether we sort of manage it within the first couple of weeks of June, I will obviously we'll keep you posted on Twitter, and for those of you in the UK Defence Community Discord server, we'll let you guys know as well via an announcement as soon as we can.
Yeah, all looking good. It'll be fantastic if that happens. We want more people to know what's happening in the world. Great for these people to hear it from us. So yeah, I think after enough time saying it, I think on that note, it'll be we can wrap it up there. What do you say?
Yep, and
So
All right.
thank
So
you very
thank
much
you all
for
for
listening.
listening. Oh,
Go
snap.
on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully it'll be the four of us in a couple of weeks. So until then.